The summons came at 3:40, which is how I knew it was real. In 31 years of Accord strategic intelligence work, I had received exactly 4 summons at that hour, and every one of them had mattered. A retirement notification does not arrive at 3:40. A protocol briefing does not arrive at 3:40. What arrives at 3:40 is the thing you spent a career preparing for, finally clearing the outer marker and announcing itself on all channels. I was 64 years old. I had been retired for 11 months. I had been sleeping in my apartment on the 43rd floor of the Veteran Solith residential complex in the Calais Shore District, 11 floors below the roofline, with a view of the North Atlantic that I had earned and intended to enjoy for several decades more. The apartment was quiet. The building was quiet. The city below was the soft amber of pre-dawn, its towers still lit in the long amber glow that the Accord's power grid maintained through every night cycle, steady and unhurried, because Calais had not gone dark in 9,000 years and had no intention of starting. My personal relay unit chimed once, which is the Accord intelligence priority signal, and then the screen lit with the authentication string I had not seen in 11 months and had not expected to see again. Director Emeritus Savin Orel, Intelligence Priority Amber 1, report to Accord Diplomatic Intercept Platform Verath Crown, Berth 7, within 90 minutes. Escort shuttle is waiting at Calais Orbital Approach Terminal, Pad 4. Authentication code follows. The authentication code was valid. I verified it twice, not because I doubted it, but because 31 years of habit does not dissolve in 11 months of retirement. I dressed in 4 minutes, took nothing but my identification credentials and the small personal data slate I had carried since my 3rd year of service, and was in the corridor before the building's environmental systems had finished their 400 transition cycle. I did not feel fear. I want to be precise about that because in the years since, people have asked me what it felt like to be recalled on that morning, and they expect something dramatic, a cold sweat, a trembling hand, a moment of existential weight as the gravity of events settled on a retired old man's shoulders. What I felt was something much quieter and much harder to explain. I felt the specific and unmistakable sensation of a very long wait coming to an end. 51 years of Accord intelligence work, 31 active and 20 years before that in training and archival research, and underneath, every day of it had been the low, constant awareness that we were building towards something, that the archive existed for a reason, that the legal preparation was not academic exercise, that the 601 vessels of the Accord response fleet had not been constructed and maintained and crewed across 4,000 years of rotating service, because someone thought it might be nice to have them. They existed because 44,000 years ago, a navigation marker beacon had been found in the dry lake bed of what the geological record called the Veteran Basin, 2 kilometers below what was now the eastern residential district of Calais Shore. The beacon had been Keth of our origin. Accord intelligence had identified the signal encoding within 6 years of its discovery, which was considered fast work in that era, before the automated decryption architectures had been developed. And in the generation that followed, the Accord's first strategic intelligence director, a woman named Vale Sarin, had made a decision that shaped the next 44,000 years of human civilization. She had decided to say nothing to anyone outside the Intelligence Directorate, to begin building a response, and to wait. I had read Vale Sarin's original decision memo 4 times in my career. It was 11 pages long. The core of it was this: the Kethavar had left a beacon here, which meant they intended to return. We did not know when. We did not know in what strength. We did not know what they would expect to find. What we knew was that they had been present here before. The geological and genetic record was unambiguous on this point, had been unambiguous for 30,000 years before Vale Sarin's time, and that they had left. Whatever their reason for leaving, the beacon meant the departure was not permanent. A faction that plants a navigation marker expects to navigate back to it. She had written, "We cannot know the timetable. We can know that preparation is always less expensive than response. We begin now. We build the counter-record from their own documents so that when they arrive into a legal framework they themselves authored and cannot dispute. We build the fleet so that if the legal framework fails, the fleet does not. We do not tell the public because public knowledge changes behavior, and changed behavior may be detectable at interstellar range. We do not tell the diplomatic corps because the diplomatic corps will want to negotiate, and there is nothing to negotiate about. We simply prepare. Every generation, the directorate prepares. And when they come, they will find that we were ready before they had finished building their first colony." That last line had turned out to be precisely accurate. We had begun the counter-sovereignty archive 6,000 years after the Kethavar left. By the time they had established their second colony world, we had already filed the first 50 million pages of legal counter-record. By the time they had built their empire across 11 star systems, we had finished it. I have told this account to 3 different audiences in the 30 years since the contact event. Once to the Accord Historical Institute's full faculty, once to the Joint Strategic Council in closed session, and once to a graduate seminar in Accord Legal History at the Caliph University, where the students were 22 years old and had grown up knowing the contact event the way I had grown up knowing the geological record of the Vethran Basin, as history that preceded them, real but remote. The graduate seminar was the hardest audience. Not because they were skeptical, but because they were not. They had never known a world in which the archive might not have been completed, in which the fleet might not have been built, in which the 44,000 years of preparation had not already been done before any of them were born. To them, the readiness was simply the condition of the world, the way the North Atlantic is simply the condition of the coast. They had difficulty grasping that it had not always been there, that someone had decided to build it, and that the decision had not been inevitable. I want to explain what the counter-sovereignty archive actually was, because the number 290 million pages is large enough to become meaningless if you do not understand what it contained. It was not padding. It was not bureaucratic mass for its own sake. Every page served a specific legal function in the framework we had built, and the framework had been designed with one governing principle, that the Kethavar, when they arrived, would be unable to dispute it, because every precedent, every citation, every legal foundation was drawn from documents they themselves had authored. The first 40 million pages were the primary citation base. Kethavar founding charters, colonial law codices, species claim protocols, Theran Compact ratification documents, and all amendments thereto, assembled from original sources recovered from the Vethran Basin beacons attached data cache, and supplemented over time by documents recovered from 3 additional beacon sites, identified in the geological record over the following 8,000 years. Every document was authenticated against the beacon source originals. Every translation was certified by a chain of Accord linguistic authorities going back to the first generation of translators. The next 80 million pages were the legal analysis, how each piece of Kethavar law applied to the specific facts of Earth's situation. The argument that Article 1, Section 4, Provision 7, civilizational development lapse of species claim authority, applied to humanity, was not a novel legal interpretation. It was the most obvious reading of the provision's plain text. But we had built 80 million pages of supporting analysis, because we understood that a legal argument is not merely correct or incorrect. It is more or less well supported, and the more comprehensively it is supported, the more expensive it becomes for an opposing party to contest. We wanted contesting the archive to be prohibitively expensive, because we did not want the dispute to go to extended Theran Compact adjudication proceedings, because extended proceedings favor larger political entities with more resources to sustain a long legal campaign. We wanted a clean, first contact decision. We wanted the evidence to be so overwhelming that the only rational response was withdrawal. The remaining 170 million pages were what the Accord legal teams called the depth record. Every piece of evidence of human civilizational development across the 50,000-year period since the Kethavar's departure, presented in Kethavar legal record format and citing the specific lapse criterion each piece of evidence satisfied. Population census records, infrastructure surveys, technological achievement registries, governance and treaty records. The full text of every Accord charter and amendment, ship construction records for the entire Accord response fleet, architectural surveys of every major human settlement, with cross-reference to the Kethavar's own definition of civilizational infrastructure thresholds from their colonial assessment protocols. 36,000 years of astronomical observation records. The complete record of every contact event with every other species humanity had encountered, including all Theron Compact interactions, all treaties filed, and all compliance reports. We had, in other words, documented the entirety of what humanity had built and become across 50,000 years, in the legal language of the species that claimed authority over us, so that, when they arrived to close the file on a dead seeding experiment, they would instead open a record of everything we had done while they were gone, and they would be reading it in their own words, by the standards they had themselves established. I thought about all of this on the shuttle up to Verath Crown. I had thought about it many times over 31 years, but there is a different quality to thinking about a plan when the plan is in motion than when it is still theoretical. The theory exists in the past tense. We did this, we built this, we prepared this. The motion exists in the present. They are here, they have the archive, the fleet is staged, the orbital ring is live. The transition from past to present is not gradual. It is instantaneous, and I experienced it fully during the 38-minute shuttle ride. And by the time I came through the inner airlock of Verath Crown, I was entirely in the present, which is perhaps the most important thing I can say about the state I needed to be in for what came next. The shuttle to Verath Crown took 38 minutes. I spent the transit reading the Priority Amber 1 briefing packet on my slate. The Kethavar Sovereign Emergence Host had dropped from fold transit at the outer marker, the Kale 9 boundary, 4.2 AU out at 2:47 local Caliph time. 11 vessels, 3 Sovereign-class command carriers, 4 escort cruisers, 3 survey auxiliaries, and 1 vessel designated in the Kethavar registry as the Mandate Archive ship Kethavar Ascending, which was, according to the intelligence notation, a mobile legal records repository. They had come prepared to argue their claim. They had arrived broadcasting a species claim beacon on all Accord standard channels, which told me everything I needed to know about the confidence with which they had made the transit. A species claim beacon is not a subtle instrument. It is the interstellar equivalent of walking into a room and announcing that everything in it belongs to you. The host had been under observation since an Accord Frontier Monitoring Division buoy at the Kale 7 approach vector had detected their fold transit signature 14 days prior. In those 14 days, the Accord response fleet had completed its staging. 601 vessels, including the 4 capital warships Accord's enduring claim, Accord's unbroken record, Caliph's long memory, and Verath's standing answer, were positioned in the Kale deep shadow on a direct intercept bearing, engines at minimum signature, running on passive power only. The 47 platforms of the Accord orbital defense ring had been brought to full active status 7 days ago, quietly, on a rolling activation schedule that would have appeared to any external sensor as routine maintenance cycling. The Accord diplomatic intercept platform Verath Crown had been positioned at 810 kilometers equatorial orbit, its communications array fully deployed. And the Counter-Sovereignty Archive, 290,417,611 pages of legal documentation, built over 44,000 years from Kethavar's own founding charters, their own species claim protocols, their own colonial law, their own Theron Compact ratifications, and their own internal legal precedents, had been loaded and certified for transmission 48 hours ago. The certification alone had taken 3 years. I had overseen the final certification review before my retirement. Verath Crown was a large platform by any measure. Its main communications bay ran 300 meters along the platform's central spine and was staffed by 41 officers during full active operations. When I came through the inner airlock at 5:21, the bay was fully staffed, every station lit, and the ambient sound was the specific quality of controlled readiness that I recognized from the 4 previous Priority Amber 1 events of my career. Not silence, but a kind of focused quiet, every person doing their work with no motion wasted. Senior Director Cale Orath met me at the airlock. He was 52, had been my deputy director for 9 years before I retired, and had taken the directorship 11 months ago. He shook my hand once and said, "They are holding at 3.8 AU. They received our acknowledgement of the species claim beacon and responded with a sovereign communication request. They want to speak to whoever holds authority over the planet." "What did you tell them?" "That we would have that person available within 2 hours. I looked at him. You recalled a retired 64-year-old. "You built the archive," he said. "The last 41 years of it. You know it better than anyone alive. And more importantly," he paused, and something in his expression shifted, settling into the particular weight of a thing that has been decided. "They are going to ask how long we have been preparing. You are the one who should answer that question." I understood him completely. There are answers that carry more weight when delivered by the person who did the work. I had something to eat in the platform galley before taking the chair, which was not ceremony but practicality. I had learned long ago that cognitive precision in high-stakes conversations requires a functioning body, and I had not eaten since the evening before. The galley was quiet at that hour, staffed by 2 crew members who moved around me with the same focused efficiency as everyone else on the platform, giving me space without comment. I had a bowl of something warm and a cup of coffee, and I sat at a small table by the viewport and looked at the stars for 10 minutes, which was the closest thing I had to a ritual preparation before difficult work. From 810 kilometers, Earth below Verath Crown was the familiar shape I had known since childhood, the blue-white curve of it, the cloud patterns shifting slowly over the ocean, the amber thread of the coastal city lights just visible on the terminator. The orbital ring was around me, not visible as a single structure, but present as the 47 platform points of light strung across the equatorial band, steady and unwavering as they had been for thousands of years. Somewhere in the Cale deep shadow, 601 Accord ships were holding position without moving, without broadcasting, waiting. From Earth's surface you would not know they were there. From the Kethavar host's position at 3.8 AU, you could not see them at all. That was the design. That had always been the design. I finished my coffee and went to the primary diplomatic chair. I took the primary diplomatic chair at 5:41. The communications array was already locked onto the Kethavar host's lead command carrier, a vessel that the Frontier Monitoring Division had designated KSH-1, and that the Kethavar themselves, in their transmitted identification packet, called the sovereign voice of the ascending mandate. It was, by the Accord sensor measurements, 4.1 kilometers long. This fact was noted in the briefing materials in a neutral, technical register, the way one notes a measurement. I appreciated that restraint. It was exactly the register we needed. The channel opened at 5:47. The sovereign commander who appeared on the primary display was not what I had expected, and I want to be careful about what I mean by that, because I had studied Kethavar biology and cultural documentation for 22 years and had a precise academic model of what they looked like. The surprise was not their appearance. It was their posture. They were bipedal, which the record had told me. They stood approximately 2.5 meters tall, with a layered chitinous structure covering the upper torso and shoulders that served, as near as xenobiologists had been able to determine from the recovered biological samples in the Vethrin Basin, as both structural support and social signaling, the patterns and colorations indicating rank. This individual's chitin was a deep iridescent blue-black, heavily patterned, which the Accord's Kethavar cultural analysis files identified as sovereign executive rank. Their face had the characteristic bilateral symmetry of the species, with the wide lateral eye placement that gave them roughly 260 degrees of unaided visual field, and the speaking apparatus below the primary sensory cluster that Accord linguists had been working with for 30,000 years. We had good translations. We had excellent translations. Actually, 44,000 years of working from their own documents gives you a thorough grounding in a language. What I had not expected was the stillness. Sovereign rank Kethavar, according to every cultural document in the archive, displayed their status through movement, a kind of formal, deliberate physical expression that communicated confidence, territorial claim, and social dominance simultaneously. The individual on my screen was still, not frozen, not stunned into rigidity. The stillness of someone who has received information they are actively processing, and who is experienced enough to know that visible reaction is a strategic liability. They had received the archive 31 minutes ago. The transmission had taken 4 seconds. The archive itself, 290 million pages, had transmitted in a compressed certified package, authentication headers first, so that the Kethavar's own legal systems could begin verification before the document body finished arriving. We had designed it that way deliberately. We wanted them to know it was real before they finished reading the first volume. I said, in Kethavar Primary Legal Register, which is the formal dialect used for sovereign communications, and which I had spent 11 years studying before I was considered proficient. I am Savin Orel, Director Emeritus of Accord Strategic Intelligence, Senior Fellow of the Caliph Accord Historical Institute, and the designated Accord diplomatic representative for this contact event. I understand you have received the Counter-Sovereignty Archive. I am available to address questions. The Sovereign Commander was quiet for 4 seconds, which in Kethavar formal communication is not silence but acknowledgement, a signal that the receiving party has heard and is formulating a response of appropriate weight. Then they said, in Primary Legal Register, the archive is indexed as 44,312 years of construction. This is not possible. Your species was assessed as pre-technological at the time of our departure. That assessment, I said, is addressed in Volume 1, Section 3 of the archive, under the heading Kethavar Colonial Survey Methodology, and its known error margins, which is drawn entirely from Kethavar's own internal survey review documents, specifically the Sovereign Survey Audit of Year 41, which your own assessors concluded produced a 22% systematic undercount of cognitive tool usage in assessed populations. The relevant citation is Audit Document 7 Keth 14, page 409. Another 4-second pause. You are citing our own internal audit documents. The archive is built entirely from Kethavar documentation, I said. We did not use a single external source. Every legal citation, every precedent, every charter reference traces back to documents authored, ratified, or formally recognized by Kethavar sovereign authority. This was a deliberate choice made 44,000 years ago and maintained without exception. We felt it was important that there be no dispute about the authenticity or applicability of the framework. I watched the Sovereign Commander's chitin shift, a subtle thing, a slight change in the angle of the upper thoracic plates, which the cultural analysis files described as a recalibration signal, the Kethavar equivalent of a person sitting back slightly in their chair. They were adjusting their model of what they were dealing with. You said 44,000 years of construction, they said. We departed this system approximately 50,000 years ago. That is correct. Which means you began preparing 6,000 years after we left. 6,214 years after the last confirmed Kethavar departure from this system. Yes. An Accord intelligence predecessor organization identified a Kethavar navigation marker beacon in the geological record at that time. The decision was made to begin preparation immediately. The Sovereign Commander was still for longer than 4 seconds this time. I did not fill the silence. One of the things you learn in 31 years of intelligence work is that silence is information, and that filling it is almost always a mistake. 6,000 years after we left, they said finally, we had not yet reached our first colony world. No, I said, you had not. By our records, your first successful colony establishment occurred approximately 4,000 years after your departure from this system, which means the Accord began the counter-sovereignty archive approximately 2,000 years before you planted your first flag on another world. The archive's legal preparation predates your empire by a significant margin. I said it without inflection, the way one reads a measurement. It was not a boast. It did not need to be. Behind me, in the communications bay, I was aware of the 41 officers at their stations, and of the specific quality of stillness that had settled over the room. Not the stillness of people holding their breath, the stillness of people who have been doing a very difficult job for a very long time, and are watching that job arrive at the moment it was always building toward. The Sovereign Commander said, we came here with 11 vessels and a mandate archive ship. We came prepared to process a species claim administrative closure. We did not come prepared for, they paused, and the chiton shifted again, more visibly this time. We did not come prepared for this. I understand, I said. I want to be direct with you about your situation, because I believe directness serves both our interests better than ambiguity. The Accord response fleet is currently positioned at bearing 274, Kale Deep Shadow, and consists of 601 vessels including 4 capital warships. The Accord orbital defense ring is at full active status, 47 platforms. This is not a mobilization in response to your arrival. This is the configuration in which these assets have operated for the past 19 years, when Accord Frontier Monitoring Division's long-range projections first identified your approach vector as a high-probability arrival corridor. We did not mobilize for you. We were already ready. The pause this time was longer. I watched the Sovereign Commander's chiton cycling through the recalibration pattern repeatedly, which the cultural files described as a sign of significant cognitive load. A high-ranking Kethavar processing information that fundamentally contradicts their working model of a situation. 19 years, they said. 19 years at full operational readiness on the projected approach corridor. 44,000 years of legal preparation. 6,000 of those years before you had established your first colony. The fleet and the ring and the archive were not built in response to your arrival. They were built in preparation for the possibility of it. There is a difference, and I think it matters. Why does it matter? I considered the question for a moment, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to give it the weight it deserved. Because, I said, a response is a reaction to a threat. A preparation is a statement of values. We built the archive because we believed that any dispute about sovereignty should be resolved through law, specifically through the law of the party making the claim, so that the framework would be undeniable. We built the fleet because we believe that legal frameworks require enforcement capacity to be credible. We maintained both for 44,000 years because we believed that the time it takes to build something is proportional to how seriously you take the reason for building it. We take sovereignty seriously. We have taken it seriously for a very long time. There was a long silence, not a Kethavar 4-second acknowledgement pause. A genuine silence, the kind that happens when a person is not formulating a response, but sitting with something that has restructured their understanding of where they are. Then the sovereign commander said, in a register that had shifted slightly, less primary legal, more something that I could only describe as unadorned. The Mandate archive ship carries the founding species claim charter for this system. It is 61,000 years old. We have carried it across 11 star systems. It is the oldest document in the sovereign archive. I know, I said. We have a certified copy. It is referenced in Volume 1, Section 1 of the Counter-Sovereignty Archive, page 3. We cite it 47 times in the first volume alone. It is, if you will permit me to say so, a very well-constructed document. The legal reasoning in Article 1 is genuinely rigorous. It is also why Article 1, Section 4, Provision 7, which specifies the conditions under which a species claim lapses upon evidence of independent civilizational development, applies here with such clarity. Your own founders wrote the provision. We simply waited long enough for it to become relevant. Another silence. You waited, the sovereign commander said. We are very patient, I said. We have had a long time to practice. What happened over the next 19 hours I will condense here, because the legal and diplomatic record of the exchange runs to some 8,000 pages in the Accord Historical Archive, and anyone who wants the full account can read it there. The summary is this. The Kethavar Sovereign Emergence Host did not fire a single weapon. They did not attempt a tactical reposition. They did not attempt to break the channel and maneuver toward Earth. When I transmitted the specific legal invocation, Kethavar Colonial Charter, Article 1, Section 4, Provision 7, citing the full evidence record of Accord civilizational development as documented in the Counter-Sovereignty Archive. The sovereign commander accepted the transmission without dispute, requested a 19-hour legal review period, and maintained station at 3.8 AU for the duration. During those 19 hours, the 41 officers of Varath Crown's Communications Bay rotated through their shifts in 4-hour blocks, and the Accord response fleet held position in the Kale Deep Shadow without moving, and the 47 platforms of the orbital ring maintained their active status, and in the Kethavar Mandate archive ship Kethavar ascending. I imagined something like 100 legal officers working through 290 million pages with the specific quality of attention you give to documents that are dismantling the foundation of something you believed. I did not pity them. I had spent too many years building the archive to feel anything as simple as pity. What I felt was closer to a kind of professional respect, that they were doing the work carefully, that they were not dismissing the archive or contesting its authentication headers or filing procedural objections. They were reading it. That was what the archive was built to make them do. During that 19 hours, I remained on Varath Crown. I slept for 4 hours in the duty rest berth adjacent to the communications bay. I ate 2 meals from the platform's galley. I reviewed the archives supporting legal briefs in preparation for any follow-up questions. I answered 11 clarifying questions from the Kethavar legal staff aboard the Mandate archive ship, each one in primary legal register, each one citing chapter and page from the archive, each one receiving a 4-second acknowledgement pause before the next question. Questions were good ones. I want to say that plainly because I think it matters. The Kethavar legal staff was not looking for loopholes or procedural escape routes. They were trying to understand the framework, to follow the chain of legal reasoning from Vale Soren's original decision through 44,000 years of construction to the specific provisions being invoked. They were treating it as what it was, a serious legal argument built with precision and integrity, deserving of serious engagement. The second question, which came at hour 4, asked about the methodology used to authenticate the documents in the primary citation base against the original beacon source materials, and my answer to it took 40 minutes and required consulting 3 separate volumes of the archive's authentication record. The questioner acknowledged each section with a 4-second pause and asked no follow-up, which I read as confirmation that the answer was satisfactory. The 6th question came at hour 11 and surprised me more than any of the others. It was not a legal question. It came from a different voice than the previous 5, a slightly different acoustic signature in the transmission, the speaking apparatus calibrated for a lower register, which the cultural files associated with senior archive staff rather than legal counsel. The question was this: in the 44,000 years of the archive's construction, had the Accord ever considered simply not completing it? Had there been a generation in which the work was interrupted, reduced, or debated as unnecessary? I sat with that for a moment before answering. Yes, I said. Twice. The first time was approximately 18,000 years into the construction, during a period the Accord historical record refers to as the Third Administrative Reorganization. A majority coalition within the Accord Directorate proposed reclassifying the counter-sovereignty project as low-priority speculative infrastructure and reducing its annual resourcing by approximately 60%. The proposal was defeated by a margin of 3 votes in the Accord Strategic Council. The director at that time, a man named Reth Kalin, wrote in his personal record, which is preserved in Volume 41 of the Archive's Provenance section, that the debate had lasted 11 months and that he had considered resigning 3 times if the proposal passed. It did not pass. The work continued. And the second time, the voice asked. Approximately 31,000 years into the construction. A generation in which no new Kethavar signal activity had been detected in 6,200 years, and in which a significant body of academic opinion had concluded that the Kethavar civilization had likely collapsed or ceased interstellar activity. The proposal at that time was not to reduce the archive, but to close it, to formally declare the threat resolved and reassign the resources. That proposal failed as well. The director at that time, a woman named Noral Veth, wrote in her decision record that the absence of signal was not the same as the absence of intention, and that a civilization which built navigation markers did not build them to be temporary. She is cited 7 times in the archive's own provenance notes. Her decision held. 4 seconds. 2 votes across 44,000 years. That determined whether the archive was completed, the voice said. Among many other decisions, I said, but those 2 were the closest, yes. There was a pause longer than 4 seconds. Then, we will note that in our registry report as well. I did not respond to that. There was nothing to add. The record was the record, and the record was what it was. 2 generations of Accord decision-makers who had chosen to continue when continuation was not guaranteed, and 44,000 years of work behind them that had made the choice worth making. And now a Kethavar legal officer on a ship 3.8 AU away, asking about the moments when it could have gone differently. Because they understood, as well as I did, that the moments when it could have gone differently were the most important part of the story. At hour 17, Signals Officer Devin Rail, 29 years old, 9 years of service, the officer who had maintained the primary channel throughout the contact event, had a cardiac episode at his console. The platform's medical team reached him in under 2 minutes and he was stabilized and evacuated to Caliph General within the hour. He survived. He is, as I write this, 53 years old and has been retired from the Accord Communications Corps for 6 years. He sends a message to the Accord Historical Institute on the anniversary of the contact event every year without fail. The last one said only, "I was there. I thought you should know I still think about it." I think about it too. I think about the 19 hours at that station, the quiet of the bay, the 41 officers doing their work. I think about the Kethavar legal staff on the Mandate archive ship working through 290 million pages of documentation built from their own ancestors' words, and what that experience must have been like. I do not know. I have thought about it for the past 30 years, and I still do not know. At hour 19, the sovereign commander opened the channel. They said, in primary legal register, the Accord Counter-Sovereignty Archive has been reviewed by the Mandate Archive ship's full legal staff. The review is incomplete. Full review of 290 million pages would require resources and time we did not bring. But the sample review conducted across all 47 volumes is sufficient to confirm the archive's internal legal consistency, its citation accuracy, and the applicability of Article 1, Section 4, Provision 7 to the current civilizational status of the Accord and its member populations. The sovereign emergence host is prepared to file a formal claim withdrawal under Kethavar Colonial Charter Article 41, Provision 2, which recognizes civilizational sovereignty as superseding species claim authority. We accept the withdrawal, I said. The filing will be received and logged in the Accord Counter-Sovereignty Archive as the closing document. We will transmit acknowledgement to the Theron Compact Registry within 72 hours. We will also, the sovereign commander said, and here the register shifted again, to something I found genuinely difficult to classify, not quite legal, not quite the formal dominance display of the sovereign channel, something in between, something that in a human speaker I might have called careful. We will also file a report with the Compact Registry regarding the Counter-Sovereignty Archive's construction and the civilizational development record it documents. We consider it relevant precedent for other pending species claim matters in the registry. I had not expected that. I was careful not to show it. We have no objection to that filing, I said. The archive is a public record of the Accord. We welcome its use as precedent. I have one final question, the sovereign commander said. Not a legal question. Oh, they paused, and I watched the chitin shift through something I had not seen in the cultural analysis files, something that did not have a catalog designation. A question of understanding. Ask it, I said. The decision to begin the archive, they said. The decision made 6,000 years after we left. The individual who made that decision, Vale Sorin, as cited in Volume 1's provenance record, she could not have known when we would return. She could not have known if we would return. She chose to commit her civilization to a 44,000-year preparation for a possibility. Yes. Why? I thought about Vale Sorin's 11-page memo. I thought about the line I had read 4 times in my career. I thought about 31 years of intelligence work and 44,000 years of preparation that I had arrived at the tail end of. A very small piece of something very large that had been built one generation at a time, each generation inheriting a task from the one before and passing it to the one after. None of them certain the work would ever be needed. All of them certain that doing the work was the right answer regardless. Because, I said, we remember things. It is one of the things we do best. We remember who was here and what they did and why it mattered. Vale Sorin remembered that you had been here. She did not know what that meant for the future, but she knew that forgetting it would be a choice, and that preparing was also a choice, and she chose to prepare. And the generation after her remembered her choice and made the same one. And so did the generation after that, for 44,000 years, not because any of them expected to see the result. Because the work was worth doing on its own terms. The sovereign commander was still for a long time. Then they said, we will inform the Compact Registry of that as well. I believe it is also relevant precedent. The channel closed at hour 19, 14 minutes and 47 seconds. The Kethavar sovereign emergence host filed their claim withdrawal 18 minutes later, transmitting the document simultaneously to Verath Crown and to the Theron Compact Registry beacon at the outer marker. All 11 vessels had reoriented toward their fold transit return bearing before the transmission was complete. By 3:12 the following morning, local Caliph time, the fold transit signatures of all 11 vessels had cleared the KL9 boundary, and the Accord Frontier Monitoring Division's outer buoy network reported clean space on all approach corridors. I submitted my after-action report to Director Orath at 600. He read it in my presence, which is not standard procedure, but which neither of us commented on. When he finished, he set the slate down on the communications bay workstation and looked at the main display, which was showing the outer system sensor feed, clean space, no contacts, the long dark between stars as unmarked as it ever is. He said, 19 years of full operational readiness, 44,000 years of legal preparation, and they left in under 20 hours. Yes, I said. Was it enough? He said. I knew what he was asking, not whether the outcome had been acceptable, whether the scale of what we had built, the generations of work, the accumulated patience of a civilization, had been proportional to an 11-vessel claim fleet that had filed a withdrawal and gone home. I thought about the question for a moment. The Kethavar had 11 star systems, I said. 11 worlds. They have been spacefaring for 50,000 years. They came here as a sovereign empire filing a routine administrative closure on what they expected to be a dead seeding experiment. They will go back to their 11 worlds, and they will file a report with the Theron Compact Registry about us, and that report will be read by every species claim authority in the Compact. And what they will read is that humanity began legal preparation for this moment 6,000 years before the Kethavar had established their first colony, before their empire existed. The archive was complete before anyone in their civilization who is currently alive was born. I paused. Was it enough? I think the question assumes there is a threshold of preparation above which the effort becomes disproportionate. I am not sure that threshold exists. The right amount of preparation is whatever you were willing to do. We were willing to do 44,000 years of it. Orath was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once, in the way of someone who asked a question and got the answer they expected but needed to hear confirmed. I took the shuttle back to Calith at 700. The city was fully lit by the time I descended through the lower atmosphere, the towers of the residential districts catching the early morning light off the North Atlantic, the harbor platforms standing in their long parallel lines, the orbital ring just visible in the upper sky as a faint geometric pattern against the blue. It looked the way it always looked. The same amber glow in the lower windows, the same traffic patterns on the elevated transit lines, the same rhythm of a city that had been doing exactly what it was doing for 9,000 years and intended to go on doing it. My apartment was quiet. I made coffee and stood at the window watching the light on the Atlantic for a while. I had one task remaining. Before I had boarded the Calith shuttle, Director Orath had transmitted me a file, the Counter-Sovereignty Archive's final entry field, which per archive protocol was to be written by the lead diplomatic officer of the contact event and logged as the closing record of the archive's active status. 44,000 years of preparation, 290 million pages, and one last page to write. I sat at my personal workstation with my coffee, and I looked at the blank field for a while. The archive had been begun by Vale Soren in the generation 6,000 years after the Kethavar left. It had been continued by 112 directors of Accord Strategic Intelligence over 44,000 years, each one adding their generation's contribution, each one logging their entry with the same header: prepared, maintained, passed on. I thought about what it meant to be the last name on that list. Not the longest, not the most consequential. Vale Soren's name would always be that. The name of the person who decided to begin when there was no certainty the beginning would ever come to anything. Not the most technically sophisticated. The directors of the 32nd through 42nd millennia had built the authentication architectures and the compression formats and the transmission protocols that made the archive deliverable in 4 seconds rather than 4 centuries. My contribution had been the final 41 years, the closing certification, the legal review, the the preparation of the transmission package, the training of the diplomatic staff who would support whoever sat in the primary chair. And then I had retired, and 11 months later I had sat in the chair myself. There is something that happens in very long projects that run across generations, that outlast everyone who begins them, that are passed forward without any certainty that they will arrive at their destination, where the last person has a particular kind of responsibility, not to do the most work, which was done long before, but to close it properly, to write the final line in a way that honors everything that preceded it. I wrote the closing record in 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph was a summary of the contact event, the date, the vessels, the exchange, the withdrawal filing, the clean departure. Factual, concise, complete. The kind of record that the Theron Compact Registry would accept, and that historians would cite for as long as people thought these things were worth citing, which I expected would be a very long time. The second paragraph was not part of the required format. I added it because I thought Vale Sorin deserved it, and because I thought every director who had written prepared, maintained, passed on, across 44,000 years deserved it, and because I was 64 years old and had spent my career in service of something I had never been entirely certain I would see concluded, and I thought the occasion warranted one sentence that was not a measurement. It said, "The archive served its purpose, in the manner its founder intended, with the outcome she prepared for, and the generation that closed it was ready because every generation before it had chosen to be." I saved the file and transmitted it to the Accord Historical Archive at 8:41 local time, 44,006 years, 4 months, and 17 days after Vale Sorin had opened the first page. Then I finished my coffee and watched the light move on the water, and the city carried on around me the way it always had, and the orbital ring caught the sun in the upper sky, and the North Atlantic was the same color it had been the morning before, and the morning before that, going back further than anyone alive could remember. We had been ready, we had always been ready. And now the thing we had been ready for was done, and the work went on, as it always had, and as I expected it always would, because that is what it means to remember, not only the event, but the preparation for it, and the discipline that made the preparation possible, and the patience that made the discipline hold across more generations than any single person could count. That is what we built, that is what we are. That is enough.